My Lords, it's a funny thing when the unelected House of Lords has to regret the cancellation of elections. Now, democracy is the foundation stone upon which the fabric of our nation is built. It's not to be carelessly discarded and requires the most careful consideration. Now, I accept that general elections are far more important than most, but local elections aren't any less valuable for shaping the local doorstep issues that people value the most in their towns, villages and cities. Now, I am a councillor. I'm a veteran of many local elections, so I know more than most how they keep councillors on their toes and refresh the councils and reinvigorate those councils. Now, elections have been cancelled before, I accept, under the Local Government Act 2000, in special circumstances like COVID and foot and mouth, truly exceptional circumstances, mostly in cases of national emergency, where all elections in all areas are cancelled. But that's not the case here. We're not cancelling elections in an emergency where Section 87 of the Local Government 2000 Act is engaged. No, this is a case of devolution and local government reorganisation, where last week the Minister in the other place could give no assurance that the process would be complete even in this Parliament by 2029. Time is clearly not of the essence. So what is the rush today? Now, when the Secretary of State wishes to move the local government deck chairs around the deck, Parliament has determined the process to be followed in bespoke legislation. Section 7 of the Local Government Public Involvement in Housing Act, in Health Act rather, 2007. It lays out in excruciating detail the particular processes, statutory tests and consultation requirements that must be engaged before elections can be cancelled in local government reorganisations. And I'm grateful to the Library for all the research they've done on this. The government says it's following that precedent set in 2021, when Somerset, Cumbria and Yorkshire were reorganised. But they are wrong, and I will explain why. Because back in 2021, the process started in October, fully 7 months out from the proposed elections. And back then, all principal authorities and other interested parties were invited to make proposals. Those proposals resulted in a number that came forward, and members of Parliament and the public were fully engaged. Later that February, the government expressed a preference and a well-defined timetable and laid orders and cancelled the elections following the process established by the Labour government in 2007. So let's contrast with this time. At this time, the majority of the cohort of principal authorities were excluded from the discussions. As the noble lady will know, only about 30 of the 200 or so principal councils affected by the proposals were engaged before the Secretary of State made her decisions. So how does she justify that? Invitations were circulated to those 30 or so councils, mostly the county councils, to endorse the concept of a mayoral devolution, with carrots that agreed, nods and winks, would cancel their elections. There was no public consultation. Now consider for a moment the conflict of interest of asking the councils facing elections whether they'd like to cancel those elections without asking the other principal authorities what they thought of the idea, still less what the public felt. Now, in January, 18 of the councils wrote to say, well, they'd quite like to dispense with those elections in exchange for a connivance on the mayoralty. Oh yes, and early LGR. Now, I'm reminded of my noble friend Lord Pickles, who is no longer in his place. He told me as a young council leader, if you don't trust the folks, don't go into politics. So in February, when the Secretary of State said that 8 of them had got lucky, if that's an appropriate, or 9 of them rather, if that's an appropriate phrase for denying electors their democratic right, it was announced their elections would be cancelled. My Lords, you have to feel for the 10 that were suckered into asking for cancellation but got the mayor anyway. And the government has willfully conflated two separate, albeit linked ideas: devolution and the creation of a mayor, and LGR and the abolition of councils. They were told that the population size for the new councils would be at least 500,000 with no upper limit. My Lords, we now learn that figure from the Minister is between 350 and 500,000, with the possibility that the 500,000 number may just be the average within a territory. My Lords, the 30 councils that connived were misled and entered into the process on a false prospectus. They were suckered. Now, my Lords, councils and mayoralties are different. You don't speed the creation of one by cancelling elections to the other, and that exposes the dishonesty of the government's approach and why we should be right to regret their actions. And so now we find ourselves debating this on the 24th of March. By law, the publication of notice of election must be made tomorrow. You have to admire the way the government has run down the clock on this. Now, the Secretary of State said that the rationale for cancelling this year's elections hinged on the fact that it would be pointless to have elections for councils, which could just be abolished a year later. But next year, on that timetable, there'll still be 2 years to go to 2028. So unless those elections are cancelled on that basis, councils would serve, as the Noble Lord has said, an unprecedented 7-year term. In what universe is that acceptable? I do want to ask the Noble Lady, what assurances can she give on the record about not cancelling next year's polls as well? And by her reasoning, there may be better justification to cancel then rather than cancelling now. At least the public would have a chance to have their say on the devolution opportunity before their plans become a done deal. Or is that the real plan? Now look, when all is said and done, we have ended up in a situation where the Secretary of State has picked and chosen the elections she'd like to avoid. Yeah. And then only in those areas where, to party advantage, it's been expedient for Labour. For there's to be no reorganisation in London, or the failed Birmingham Authority where the rubbish is piling up in the streets, or in the Manchester. My Lords, there are more councillors within the M25 than all the county councils of England. And Labour is using all of this to create a permanent, structural, metropolitan bias in the way our country is governed, extending its war on the countryside to the fabric of our constitution. Now, the Noble Lady has previously reported to a PwC report that suggests all of this will make significant savings, but of course that isn't how it's worked out in Somerset. And I am fresh from chairing the local government pension scheme this morning, and I can tell the House for the first time that that PwC report makes no allowance for the pension strain costs of all these reorganisations, and the astonishingly eye-watering pension strain costs that will allow senior local government officials to take retirement on a full pension at either 55 or 57 on efficiency grounds. I heard today that additional pension strain could easily be £500,000 per person. My Lords, in its haste, the government is sleepwalking into a £1 billion pension strain black hole entirely of its own making. And of course, most of all, it won't save any money for the ratepayer. The counties and districts are the most efficient, and local parts of government will be merged. But then a new, more remote layer is being applied on top, with towns and parishes who are unconstrained on revenue raising remaining. Look, the government is moving too quickly, and local people will pay for this devolution sleight of hand that will see us moving from 3 value layers to 3 expensive layers, whilst taking the electors for fools and playing fast and loose with democracy. Now, I am not against local government reorganisation, but the government needs to remember that all the orders for their plans must pass through this place. And once bitten, this House will be twice shy. My heart would like to support the fatal motion, and had it been more promptly, then there would have been strong reasons and precedent from 2000, as the Noble Lord Renard has said, to do so. But I am conscious of the conventions of the House, and importantly and practically, that elections must be called tomorrow. It's too late to cancel them now, not just for the parties to get their candidates in place, but also for the officials who would need to book the village halls and count the staff. So I will support the regret motion. But my biggest regret, of course, is that it was for most part my Conservative councillor colleagues who have turned into the biggest losers by conniving with Labour on their own destruction, whilst allowing the Labour Party to pick and choose the elections it doesn't want to fight.